Welcome to Shift, a college admissions, ACT, and SAT podcast for a changing world. I'm Tyler, the founder of Achievable, and we have an affordable ACT course that includes everything you need to ace your exam. A full textbook, tons of ACT questions backed by our memory-enhancing algorithm, videos on key topics, a built-in study planner, and full-length practice exams. You can get a free trial by going to achievable.me, and if you like it, the code podcast gets you 10% off at checkout. Now, let's get started. Today, we have Nat Crawford from Improve Your English back on the show. Really excited to have you back, Nat, and I'd love if you could just introduce yourself for those who have not heard you before.
Yeah, so my name's Nat Crawford, and I'm president and owner of Improve Your English Tutoring Services, a Silicon Valley-based tutoring company. I did my undergraduate work at the University of Chicago. I went on to graduate work in the PhD program in English at Stanford University. And since leaving Stanford, I've been a teacher in Silicon Valley for over 20 years at this point, helping some of the world's most talented students get into the colleges of their dreams.
Great. Yeah, and speaking of which, today we're going to be talking about how to get your child ready for college admissions from an early age. And you expressed surprise when we were doing our prep that this hasn't come up on the podcast before. But I also think that part of that is because we live in Silicon Valley, the place where people are trying to get their child into Stanford from basically like the day that they're born. So I think that it's just like we're living in such a competitive universe, right? Like my aunt and her daughter's 18 now in Oregon, and there is not nearly the same level of intensity as there is in Silicon Valley around like extracurriculars, summer camps, and all these other things. So that makes you the perfect person to talk to about this. And I guess the first question I have is kind of when is a reasonable time to start? I am always of the opinion that, kids should have a chance to have a childhood and that, they shouldn't be basically like doing SAT prep in like fifth grade or anything like that. But I also think that, there's probably a lot of parents that are a little more ambitious than I am with their kids' education. So I'm curious sort of what you would say is like a typical starting point or maybe like a recommended starting point to even like think about this stuff and start to map it out.
Yeah, sure. I think what, you mentioned not practicing for the SAT starting in fifth grade, which I fully agree with, right? I think that SAT prep is or ACT prep is best. It's best delayed until maybe 10th grade at the earliest, in my personal opinion, right? But I think the first thing to think about when it comes to college admissions is academic preparation. And that begins with strong skills in reading, writing, and arithmetic. And especially today with COVID learning, online learning really, really hurt students. I don't know what you've seen. I know you more specifically do test prep, but I generally teach students with a wider range of, things that they're trying to do for reading and writing. And one thing that I've noticed is that students who come to us now who have been through 2+ years of online learning really are struggling with some fundamental things that I would never have expected students, especially students in Silicon Valley, to struggle. When they're struggling with vocabulary, of course, they're struggling with reading comprehension, but they're also struggling with focus, and there's also a kind of a psychological aspect to it. Like some students have been emotionally struggling as well for one reason or another, and this is leading to like this is leading to weaker skills in our case, like when we talk about reading and writing. And so it's really important if you're interested in having your kid apply to top college to make sure whatever's going on in your child's schooling, that you are keeping the focus on really developing strong reading and writing skills, because those are not only the foundation for a strong SAT or ACT score, they are also the foundation for good grades in high school classes, which are also a really important component of a college application. Now, the good news is that, in my personal opinion, this is not too hard to do, right? So, for instance, I have a son who's he's 10 years old this year. He's in fifth grade, and
Great.
when COVID started, he was I can't believe I don't remember this, but I think he was either in first or second grade,
Mhm.
and so he had an entire year of online learning, and I could see very clearly that online learning was not teaching him as much as he would have learned if he were on his own. And so, since I'm a teacher, like, I made sure we were doing things that were going to help him out. Right. One of the things I did was, since it was hard to go to the library at that point, I actually invested, like, well over $1,500 in books for him to read and audiobooks for him to listen to. So he was doing a ton of reading during that time. And if you and that's this is one of the easy ways to lay that foundation for getting into a top college. I'm not aiming for my son to get into Harvard, but I do want him to have strong reading and writing skills. And a very easy way to help those develop early on is by making sure that your child reads books, listens to books, and that you're reading to your child as well. And that's been, in his case, it's been very helpful. He's always had really solid reading scores when it comes to his classes, even though he's been through the challenge of online learning as a young kid.
Right. Well, and that's kind of that brings up kind of an interesting thing, right? Because you could kind of make the argument that, like, getting your child prepared for college could start as early as you want if you include things like reading to them and making sure that they're, like, reading books as opposed to being on the TV or iPad and things like that, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's a yeah, I guess it's a blurred line in terms of what when the quote unquote start date is. But I also think that, sorry, just before you jump in, I think that the more important thing than, maybe, I'm preparing them for college, is probably, like, I'm preparing them for school, and I'm preparing them with life skills that will also even potentially translate to things after school.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And the reason I brought it up is because it's I think a lot of parents equate college preparation with test prep, and what they forget is that test prep it's really about the foundation that you have. The broader your foundation, in terms of your ability to read, your ability to write, your ability to do math, the more generally strong your foundation in those areas, the better you're going to do on a standardized test. You might, like, someone who's generally strong in those areas might only need to take a couple of practice tests before taking the actual SAT or ACT. Whereas a student who's weak in those areas, is going to have to do a lot more test prep in order to get what, for Silicon Valley at least, would be an acceptable score on the SAT or ACT. So I bring it up because what I've noticed in talking with parents is that there's a little bit of a disconnect sometimes in their minds between getting ready for the SAT and, like, the reading and writing their kids are doing outside of getting ready for the SAT.
Right, and that's the thing too, is that particularly with kids that are well before the age where they would be preparing for the ACT or SAT, right? Like, I think it's the context that you want is that, they're doing it for fun,
Mhm.
hopefully.
Yeah, right. I mean, taking a test can be fun. Like there's no, it can be, it's like, like running a race or something like that. And
Hmm.
if you're involved in sports, like you prepare, you're nervous, you hope you do well, but you get out there on the track, and you can have a great amount of joy in the competition.
Hmm. Yeah. So then, as we kind of like go on with the topic here, I'm thinking the next thing I want to ask you about is kind of what are some things that people can do, and maybe this is something that evolves as sort of like the child grows up, right? I mean, for instance, the example from earlier, right? Have your kid do more reading
Mhm.
when they're younger, have your kid listen to audiobooks when they're younger. What are some other sort of things? I guess we can just go chronologically, right? Like, what are
Mhm.
some things that you can kind of do for younger children, say, kind of like before middle school, some things to think about in middle school, and then things to think about in high school?
Yeah. So one of the big things is activities, and even
Hmm.
before you think about a particular activity, you have to have a plan for your activity, and the plan should be that you find an activity that your child really enjoys, and that he will want to stick with for a number of years, hopefully all the way through high school. And
Hmm.
this is good. It's not just a matter of getting ready for college applications. It's also, like it gives you a richer and more fulfilling life. So the like one example, for instance, is music, right? So a lot of families do get their kids involved with music, I think, with the idea that it will help college application. But learning a musical instrument is incredibly valuable in a number of ways, simply apart from a college
Hmm.
application. And it's true that not every kid is equally excited about learning music, not equally committed to practicing music, and so forth. Right? You can't, like,
Hmm.
if you have a kid who's just really not very excited about it at all, then it might be hard to force him to do it. But musical training is something that um, you can start at a relatively young age with a student, and they can continue to do it all the way through high school and have a great experience with musical training. And then it also turns out that it helps with college applications as well. You don't um, you don't like those younger years. You don't get them back, right? Like if a family
Hmm.
the family is spending $5,000 a year on private music lessons for a child starting from the age of 7. Um, it's not when the kid is 15. You can't just suddenly start spending $50,000 a year and saying, like make my kid the best
Like,
trumpet
catch it all up,
trumpet
yeah.
player, right? It's something that you do, that kids really benefit from starting at a young age and just continue.
Hmm. Right. Well, and I think also the other thing too is there's sort of compounding effects, right? And then there's also, I think a lot about my own upbringing. One of my big regrets from childhood is that I never learned anything musical because I ended up being really interested in music in high school.
Hmm.
But by then, I felt like I was so far behind the curve
Right.
that I was very discouraged and I never really got into it then either.
Hmm.
Right.
Hmm.
And so there's this TV show for kids called Adventure Time, but it has one of my favorite quotes, which is, the first step to being good at something is sucking or being like awkward at it,
Yeah.
right?
So true.
And it's so true. And I think that when you're like, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, that's just like what everyone is. That's what everyone's doing, right? Like, yeah, there's probably some 8-year-olds out there that can play piano like an adult, and those kids are crazy, and
Hmm.
that's fine. You don't need to compare yourself to that.
Right.
But it's just like, giving giving them that space to kind of do it without pressure early, I think is a lot better than suddenly you get to sixth grade and it's like college applications are coming up in 7 years, so better have something you can put on your resume. Looks like you're doing the clarinet, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't think that also is very motivating for the child either. Generally speaking, I mean, this is my own personal experience. I don't have a child yet. But my experience for myself, and I think for other people, is if your parents are like, hey, this is a thing and you have to do it because reasons, you're like, well, screw that, right? Your heart's not going to be in it the same way as if it was something you genuinely really liked.
Right. Although, and you're absolutely right. Although I do need to add that, like sometimes you do need a bit of external. It's like school, right? Sometimes you need it when it comes to an activity like music. Sometimes you need a little bit of external enforcement in order to make sure that that the child is practicing or something like that. Because it's like kids don't necessarily want to go to school either. They certainly don't want to do homework, and like we do have to, as parents, we have to monitor and make sure that they're getting that stuff done. Likewise with practicing music, like it's really important to. I think parents should expect to get some resistance occasionally, or maybe even more than occasionally, from a child when it comes to music. It's not just a question of you find the right instrument and then the child loves to play, and then there's no difficulty in having them practice to prepare for their lessons. But the payoff, the payoff for it is really big. It's really big. Socially with making friends, it's really big, like intellectually for exposing them to new worlds and so forth. So yeah, there's it's not easy, but it's worth it.
I mean, pretty much anything to just have it so they're not staring at the computer all day, right?
Yeah,
I think that's probably the best thing almost in all instances. So then so when you get to sort of sixth grade, right? I mean, are you ready to move on to kind of the next timeline section here with going to like sixth or eighth?
I guess, with sixth grade, I mean, something with sixth grade, a lot of times you're getting into a little bit more, like bigger decisions about how to allocate time. So for instance, organized sports can become more specific in sixth grade, I suppose. You get things like competitive soccer teams, travel sports teams, and so forth. That at that age, and one thing again, if you're like as another activity that you can do that your child can do in order to help prepare for applying to college is an athletic activity of some kind. Here again, if it's a skill-based activity like basketball, soccer, I suppose swimming is a skill-based activity too. It makes a difference to be working at it at a young age. I'm fully aware that it is possible for all the joy to be taken out of athletic competition by overly emphasizing results and winning and so forth. I'm fully aware of that. But it's also the case that, again, a lot of the people who are high achievers in a sport in high school will have done significant practice with that sport at a younger age, like as young as sixth grade or maybe even earlier. So this is another area where, like if your child has some passion for a particular kind of athletic event, then look for ways like to make that time commitment, perhaps a financial commitment as well for additional training, in order to help your child develop in that area in a certain way. And this, if you're ambitious for a top college, this is something again that can certainly help when it comes to laying the groundwork for that kind of application.
Right. Yeah, and I think also, so athletic side, totally agree. And then I guess the question is, what about like the non-athletic side, right? Like, are there academic things, right? When you're talking about kids who are kind of 10 and under, you're getting them to read more, maybe getting them to do some like intro to programming courses or whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
right? But once I feel like it definitely shifts into second gear going into like
Mm-hmm.
sixth or eighth grade as you're
Right.
kind of getting ready for high school and getting ready for the ramp into the college admissions world.
Yeah. So I think one thing that you can do is like at this point probably you should be looking for summer camps or something like that where a kid could explore an intellectual interest of some kind, if only just to see if he really likes it or not.
Mm,
So so like sometimes you'll see, I guess this is relevant, really sixth through ninth grade, I would say. It can be good. Like we had a student who like went to a camp that was specifically for neuroscience, and she went to the camp and she thought it was reasonably well organized, but she decided she wasn't really that excited about um, majoring in neuroscience, and so she was in ninth grade, had just graduated from
mm-hmm,
ninth grade at the time, and so she decided to start looking into other STEM-based majors
mm-hmm,
apart from neuroscience. So like this sort of thing is what you can do. Just explore with to see what your child might be interested in. In terms of arts, right? Students don't get a lot of chance to do things like theater in school these days. So maybe trying your kid out at a theater camp to see if he's got an interest in it.
mm-hmm,
I had a student who developed an interest in theater. I actually, in ninth grade, I noticed that he was just an excellent reader when it came
mm-hmm,
to reading literature, and so I suggested, hey, why don't you try out theater? See if you like it. And he tried it. He enjoyed it. He kept doing it. He wrote about it for his Common App essay, and he ended up being admitted to Brown. So
mm-hmm.
he's not a theater major, but this is something that like hadn't been a part of his life just because of the things that his family valued. But he discovered that he did have a passion for it, thanks to doing some additional work in it over the summer. So when we're talking about sixth, seventh, eighth, even ninth grade, this is a really good use of summer activity time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I also think the other sort of important thing is this is going to help kids figure out what they don't want to do, right?
Yep. Yep.
Um, I mean, especially the thing that you don't want to have happen is you're driving them, say, towards being a computer science major their whole childhood. You're going to be a CS major, you're going to go to Stanford, you're going to start the next Facebook or whatever it is. But with that, basically you have like a kid who sometimes does all that, gets to college, and then they're like, I hate this. Well, you just applied to a CS program at a competitive CS school. uh Now what, right? So
Right.
it's definitely better to kind of let that all happen in the early stages, especially I think sixth through ninth grade, because hopefully you can pick or commit to like a couple of things in high school that at least will form sort of the foundations of your application.
Yep. Absolutely. I completely agree. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so then anything else on sixth through ninth grade? Or sorry, sixth through eighth, whatever, that kind of
Yeah.
window.
Yeah. Sixth through eighth. This is. I am going to come back to academics, right?
Yeah.
One of the big problems with schools these days is I think middle school is not doing enough to prepare students for high school, certainly in the public schools.
Mm,
In addition, there's persistent grade inflation in middle school to the point where almost everyone seems to be getting an A just for turning in work. And so I think it's really important to keep an eye on the work your child is doing. And if you see anything that looks like where you're thinking, man, I could do this when I was his age, and he's having some difficulties with it. You
mm,
want to deal with that as soon as possible. Whether whether it's math or writing or reading. Um, Middle school is the time to really try to address those problems when they're relatively small before they get to be bigger problems in high school. Because it's really I think it's really hard on a teenager to feel like he or she has to catch up to his or her friends. And
Hmm.
if you and if that gap is really big in high school, along with all the other challenges that teens go through in high school, it just makes the experience harder than it has to be. So staying on top of academics when the kid is in middle school and being ready to do some supplemental work with the child, either guidance from yourself or hiring a professional so that you don't have to do it yourself. It's
Hmm.
just really, really important. Again, and this would be no matter what kind of college you are hoping your child attends. But it's really important being on top of the academics again.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, and I think, basically starting in high school is when, especially if you're applying to top colleges, that's when really the GPA really starts to count, right?
Yep. Hmm.
And you really want to try to be getting A's again for top colleges. You want to try to be getting A's in everything that you possibly can. Which the thing that, at least for me, I kind of like. I was a smart kid who didn't really care if I got a B if I put in almost no effort to get it, right? Um, like I was optimizing for less work rather than better grades. And I think that, you know, going from, yeah, okay, I got like an 85 on that test. I guess I could have studied more, whatever, not a big deal, to being like, oh, like I have to get A's on everything. I have to prepare for everything. I have to kind of study for everything. That is a mindset shift, and it's one that I think that is going to have a transition period. So I would say start that as early as you can in middle school, so that you're kind of humming along by the time you get to high school.
Yeah, it's a good point, and I gotta say that there's a gender difference here with that.
Mm,
Like I taught high school for 4 years, and one of the groups of kids I taught was 10th graders. So all 4 years that I taught at Pinewood in Los Altos Hills, I had a group of 10th graders, and you would see what I saw was that the 10th grade boys, in many cases, went through a very big maturation process even
mm,
over the course of the year. Like a lot of them when they started, they seemed to me to have more like middle school attitudes towards education and learning, and like it was gradually over the course of 10th grade that they started to get more mature about the learning that they were doing, the effort that they were putting in, and so forth. By contrast, the girls were, you know, they were doing the things that teachers expected them to do, uh, and studying more and taking more care with their assignments and so forth. So you can also, like if you've got a son and you feel like in ninth grade he's kind of immature, and you've got a friend who's got a daughter and she's really on top of everything. They're really like girls' brains mature earlier than boys' brains do, and
mm.
you shouldn't. It's kind of it's something you should basically expect. Like you should expect to have a little bit more struggle potentially with a boy in like eighth, eighth and ninth grade and earlier than you would with a girl.
Interesting. Yeah. So then once we get into high school, kind of what are the tips you have for that, right? I mean, now we're
Yeah,
kind of out of the early childhood and we're into like crunch time.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, like maybe because I think there's probably tons of advice on this. Maybe we talk about now that you've kind of set these foundations, how to kind of parlay that or work off of that.
Yeah, exactly. So, let me tell you about a big mistake that I see families making, and that is dropping extracurricular activities so that the child has more time to study. Uh, on the surface, it seems like a sound thing to do, right? Like my son has been spending all this time, like maybe playing the piano, but we're going to stop the piano and so that he has more time to study for computer science and get an A in computer science. The problem is that for college admissions, and particularly admission to top schools, what really matters is continuity of effort over a period of many years. And so, you might have a kid who has done an activity already for 5 years, and then he suddenly stops when he starts high school, and that ends up, in my opinion, hurting the college application, because he no longer has something. He's lost an activity that he's made a long-term commitment to, and that could look like a long-term commitment if he included it on his college application. So, like if there's a sport that your child has been doing, or an instrument that your child has been playing, really think about how the kid can continue doing that, because that is something that if you've been doing it for a long time, it leads to higher achievement later on. Which, if your goal is getting into a top college, like, that achievement is going to be very important for the college. So try to keep on going with activities. If the kid is sick and tired of the activity and this happens, then yeah, you might have to drop it. But if you do that, find something else to replace it. Don't replace it with study time, right? So you need top colleges, at least, they want to admit students who can get top grades while doing a lot of other activities in their high school.
Yeah, because they want more activities. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're not looking for students who got top grades, but they had to spend all of their time studying in order to do it. Right. That might work for a good state school, for a good mid-tier C, perhaps, but it's not.
Right.
It's not going to work for a top 10, top 15 private college.
Yeah, and I think that it's so important because people are really looking for applicants that are well-rounded, right? Like, they don't just want a bunch of bookworms.
Right.
And so, even if you got a B in computer science, but you kept up with that hobby, it might almost be worth the trade. I mean, it's kind of hard to pinpoint that, right? But yeah,
the problem is that the problem is that it could be equally bad, right? If you don't have activities, yeah, that's bad. And then if you have a B in computer science and you're applying for a STEM degree, then that's bad as well. So, but if your ambition is to get into a top 10 school, then you have to find a way to continue with activities or start new ones, and then also get good grades. And it would be totally fine, of course, to just set your sights a little bit lower in terms of college applications, right? There are many, many excellent colleges across the country that do not require students to have 4.0 GPAs and like be captain of the badminton team, or and then also the president of a major volunteer organization, right? But if you want to aim for it, you have to try to make that happen.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it's a very competitive landscape, and the unfortunate answer is that you kind of have to do everything if you want to be one of the 2% or whatever that get into Harvard. So
that's right. So as far as the other stuff, when you get into high school, I think the one of the important things here to bear in mind as well is that it's going to get harder from year to year. The studying will be more of a challenge. The time commitment for classes will likely be more of a challenge as you're moving from freshman year to sophomore year to junior year. But you do have to find a way to get leadership in an activity, and that's going to require more of a time. So one of the other mistakes that I see people making is they confuse participation in a lot of activities with leadership in a few activities. And what it's
Yes.
much you want to aim from an early age for leadership. So one thing that I'm always asking ninth graders and 10th graders is, like, for this activity, are you on track to be team captain or president of the club if it's a club by the time you are a junior or a senior in high school? And that's, I think, a way to really just kind of clarify what the value of the activity is for the kid.
Right.
What you want to do is you want to ideally, you want to either, like, start a club that didn't exist before and turn it into something good, or you can take a club that doesn't have a whole lot going on, and you can make it a lot better, right? You could
Hmm.
double, triple, quadruple the number of people involved in it, and do a lot more activities with the club, raise more money, and so forth. Doing something like that with a single club is much more significant than simply participating in 5 or 6 student clubs that meet once a week during lunch. So,
Right.
like, as if you're ambitious for a top college, then when you get into high school, you need to be thinking in terms of, well, how am I going to lead? How can I improve this organization that I'm a part of? Because that's the sort of thing that stand out for top colleges.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And something that gets missed a lot with a lot of schools, or not schools, with a lot of advice is this idea that, you want to be in 14 different clubs. Like at that point, like a school's going to look at that and be like, okay, clearly you were being driven pretty hard by somebody, right? But at the end of the day, it doesn't show like genuine interest in anything. And it also doesn't really show that you did much, right? Like you could be a member of that club and have never shown up,
Right.
right? You
Yeah.
just put it on the resume anyway. It's when you become, vice president or president or whatever, or start a club or do like have a project that you demonstrate interest in the field or whatever the club is. And then you also demonstrate those leadership skills, which they always want to see, right?
Right.
They're not looking for, they're not looking for, the best number twos out there. They want to find the leaders of the world because those are the people that generally get recognition, and then that recognition basically passes on to the school. So I think that, yeah, that's just a really good thing to emphasize. You're a lot better off with us being a leader in 3 clubs than a member of 10 clubs.
Right. Right. And the good news, is that, like, really it's high degrees of leadership in 2 activities is what top colleges are looking for. Now, when we say high degrees of leadership, we mean pretty darn high degrees of leadership, right? So,
Hmm.
like, if you want to be captain of your athletic team, where the athletic team has high achievement, um, and in
Hmm.
addition to that, you want to be like maybe the principal oboe player in the school orchestra, because that shows high achievement in the instrument as well. But
Hmm.
you don't really need, if you have something like that, like where you're captain of the sports team and also playing a musical instrument in a leadership capacity somewhere. That really should be good enough for at least one top 10 school to admit you if
Hmm.
you've got the other stuff under control: grades, test scores, uh, again, high quality essays, and a good strategy when it comes to choosing topics for your essays. Right, but
Yeah.
in terms of activities, that's kind of the fundamental goal. Really, should be leadership and high degrees of achievement in 2 activities. And if you do that,
Hmm.
you definitely have a shot. It's the kids who lack that leadership that um, will have, in many cases, high grades, high test scores, and then they'll wonder, well, what went wrong with my application to Stanford? Why wasn't I able to get in? That's those are the ones where it's usually um, you can kind of tell why it is that a top college is less interested in admitting.
Right. Yeah. Well, and also the other part you just like said essay, and it made me think. I mean, the other thing about all this is that when you are really dedicated to something and you've put a lot into something, you generally um, that like feeds into your essay, it feeds into your application.
Right.
Sometimes there will be stories
Yes.
that come from, oh, I was president of this club and, I had to deal with this thing that happened and here's how I handled it or whatever. But it all kind of feeds together, and sort of, I guess, the way to summarize it, as corny as this is colleges these days are looking for arrows, not circles. They're looking for people that are really strong and moving in a direction, um, in a focused direction on a sort of single thing or a couple of things, as opposed to people that dabble a little bit in everything.
Yeah, and I would say on that topic, one of the big things here, just to get at the core thing, is I know it's cliched advice at this point, but find something you're passionate about and run with it.
Right.
And in high school, that passion could change. Like you could like in 10th grade, you could decide you're tired of one activity and like and start another activity instead. But if you become like a team captain and the team has a lot of success, then there's no problem with that at all. The main thing is you want to be passionate about what it is that you're doing so that you bring that energy to the activity and you really enjoy doing it. Like if a college sees that, then it's really going to give you serious consideration. They can kind of, I think they can kind of get a feeling for students who are doing activities because they feel like they've been forced into them, or their heart's not really in it for one thing, for one reason or another.
Right. And that's kind of at least my conclusion to this whole conversation is, at the end of the day, I think a lot of people look at a college as like the goal, but realistically, college should be a step on the journey to becoming, the world's best cellist or an amazing marine biologist or whatever it is that your kid wants to do. So, focus on that, right? Like focus on kind of like what are they developing their interests, and then what are they actually going to do with their career or whatever outside of school and outside of work that they do, as opposed to just being like, this is all to get into college. Like it's also so that they learn what they like and what they want to do.
Right. Yeah. And the just to like I help just to give my own thoughts about this. Like I've been talking like for the benefit of parents who are thinking, I'd like my kid to go to a top 10, top 15 school. What do I need to do in order to make that happen? Back to the maturity issue, not every kid is mature enough to like really be ready to apply to a top 10, top 15 school when he's in high school. And some like some high school students burn out when they get to college. They have all that freedom, and they, for the first time, they don't know what to do with it, right? So the like the main thing here is here's like if your kid like looks like he's interested in something, help him pursue it. Like give him the resources he needs to pursue it, and if that leads to a top like being able to apply to top 10, top 15 colleges, then fantastic. But if not, like if the kid is not ready for it in high school, life is long, and there are many opportunities for all of us, especially in the United States, to succeed. Like regardless of where we go to college, and I think that's an important bit of perspective to bear in mind.
Right. Yeah, that's all great. Anything else you want to share here before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think I've probably said what I have to say on this topic here, so thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been Shift, a college admissions podcast for a changing world, hosted by Tyler from Achievable with Nat Crawford from Improve Your English. And Achievable has a great ACT course that you can try for free at achievable.me. Use the code podcast to get 10% off at checkout.